I was blown away by the fact that there was a book that I could relate to at that much of an internal level. Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. It's Tori, and today I'm going to be doing the final installment of my book review of Legion, The Many Lives of Stephen Leeds by Brandon Sanderson. First thing I'm going to do is take this dust jacket off because it's going to glare at you otherwise, and I'm going to be flipping around in this book a lot in this video. Now, my first disclaimer for this book is I'm going to be discussing mental health in a fair amount of detail, specifically trauma and trauma-based compartmentalization. So if that is something that you are uncomfortable with, please feel free to exit the video at any time. I am also going to do my absolute best not to give any heavy spoilers, but I will be reading different sections throughout the book. So if you haven't read this book and you don't want to know anything of what happens, now is the time to exit the video. If you don't agree with my opinions, that's totally okay and we can still be friends. So in September of 2019, I was diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder, which is not the disorder that Stephen has, as he mentioned several times. However, the basic premise of how he relates to his aspects and how they interact together as a system, honestly, was the closest thing I have ever seen to a book that I felt like I was the protagonist. I was blown away by the fact that there was a book that I could relate to at that much of an internal level. The very first thing that I want to point out is actually right away at the beginning of the book. Brandon Sanderson wrote a preface to the book that I would like to read a tiny bit of here. I've always believed that the personality traits that make us each distinctive, the way we process information, the way we motivate ourselves, the way we shelter our psyche from the bad while learning to cherish the good, can either be our greatest strengths or our most dramatic limitations. How you see yourself, along with how you use what you have, is often more important than talents, skills, or even supernatural abilities. Now, Stephen definitely takes the idea of a mental health disorder and pushes it to the absolute extreme, but Brandon Sanderson does that in a brilliant way. He doesn't define what Stephen has as any absolute specific disorder. He says several times that schizophrenia is probably the closest thing, but there are also aspects of this that I very heavily related to as somebody with DID as well. Now, one of the things that I want to say, Sanderson does such an awesome job of calling out so many things that people with complex disorders like that deal with in daily life. And the first one is when people think that they know what you mean when you say you have a certain type of disorder or you're experiencing a certain type of thing, and you have to explain to them that something is different than they think it is. At one point, when he is talking to someone who's going to work with him, she says, "They don't do you justice. I imagined you as a brilliant mode shifter, slipping in and out of personalities." Stephen immediately responds, "That's dissociative identity disorder," I said. "That's different." He says that twice in the first 100 pages of the book, and I was so excited. I was like, oh my gosh, somebody is taking the time to correct the assumption that all of these disorders are basically the same thing. Now, when it comes to the aspects that Sanderson creates for Stephen, it's really fascinating because aspects, and just like alters in dissociative identity disorder, it is a form of compartmentalization of trauma, and Stephen, he has learned to control his hallucinations to the point where he can compartmentalize knowledge. But what I thought was really interesting about it is that not only is he compartmentalizing knowledge, he's also compartmentalizing different parts of himself that are fears or struggles that he's having internally. So while JC, one of his main aspects, is a physical protector where he's constantly looking around for weapons or exits, and he's, focused on kind of the physical threat in the external world. He also, I think, represents a part of Stephen that is afraid of that physical pain or physical harm. He talks about multiple times that his aspects have different disorders themselves. There's OCD, there's different phobias. So it's interesting to see how Stephen has locked away and compartmentalized these different things about himself so that it's a lot easier to handle in bite-sized pieces than it is as one giant picture. Another thing that I absolutely love that Sanderson points out in this book is he does a great job of unearthing some of the daily struggles and some of the more philosophical conversations that happen surrounding mental health as a whole. One of those, on page 50, he talks about, he's still talking to this lady, Monica, who's a real person, and she is asking him some different things, and she's kind of concerned because she's just kind of decided that maybe he's insane. And she says, "You see people who aren't there, Mr. Leeds. It's a difficult fact to get around." He responds, "And yet, I live a good life." I said, "Tell me, why would you consider me insane, but the man who can't hold a job, who cheats on his wife, who can't keep his temper in check, you call him sane?" I love that he calls that out because so many of the books and movies that have mental health disorders in them really kind of sensationalize it, and they make the characters either violent or completely unable to live any kind of a normal life, which is so infuriating to people who actually have these complex disorders, who do have normal lives, who have friends, who get married, who have kids, who hold really successful jobs. We need more of that. More of that. Thank you. End of soapbox. Another thing that I want to mention that Sanderson pulls into this book is he includes a character who's a real person who is a support person, and that is Wilson, who is Stephen's butler slash chauffeur slash like housekeeper of sorts. And at one point during the book, when Stephen is really struggling and he's trying to finish this case and he's really going all out, Wilson reaches out and touches Stephen's arm, and he says, "Do not become so preoccupied with saving the world, Master Leeds, that you forget to take care of yourself." And that, like, Sanderson was just blowing me away. His decision to include Wilson as a support person, I loved it so much, and it was so sweet and so compassionate and loving, and I loved Wilson as a character immensely. Now, as we start getting in farther to the book, and this is where there may be some spoilers in here, so if you have not read the book yet and you don't want to know anything, stop watching here, but I do want to make a comment about these because I can't pass this up. Stephen hits a roadblock. He really needs some time to step back, to calm his mind, to get everybody back together. And he says, "In some ways, I often feel like my white room, a blank slate. The aspects have all the character. I try very hard not to stand out, because I am not crazy." And I can only speak to dissociative identity disorder because that's the one that I personally have. Those kinds of disorders, these different alters or aspects or whatever the disorder manifests as, is created as a way to survive. It's created as a way to protect. So these different aspects are protecting Stephen from standing out. They protect him from being crazy. They're crazy. He's not crazy. And that's a really brilliant way that these disorders work, is that they allow your brain to compartmentalize trauma or fear in a way that it feels like it's somebody else. It's not me, it's somebody else. I didn't go through that trauma, someone else did. Or I don't have to deal with that fear because she's afraid of this or he's afraid of this. Another thing he points out on page 213, he says, "I see it differently, but even if we admit that the same word, crazy, applies to me, it applies to you too. The longer I've lived, the more I've realized everyone is neurotic in their own individual way." Preach. Let's be real, like everybody struggles with different things. It manifests differently because we are all different human beings and we all have different experiences. Our brains all work a very different way. But at the end of the day, everybody struggles with things. Everybody has different neurotic tendencies. And I think that is so important. And I'm so grateful. I realize I'm sounding ridiculous at this moment, but I am so thankful that Sanderson took the time to really touch on some issues in this book that really are gonna, I think, make a difference for people that read it. So I don't have a lot of notes on the end of this story because I found this to be the hardest part for me to read, but that was something that, you know, for personal reasons it was harder to read, but it was also really, really well done. And I still don't know 100% how I feel about the ending. I'm gonna give myself some more time to think about it and to figure out how I feel about it. I have never read a book that so brilliantly tackles mental health as a daily theme, even while giving its protagonist some exceptional qualities that are not normal for most people with these kind of disorders. But the relatability was so incredible. Don't go into this book and say, this is exactly what it's like to have schizophrenia, or this is exactly what it's like to have dissociative identity disorder. I think that this book does a great job of showcasing kind of what it can be like, but realize that everybody with a mental health disorder is different. It's a spectrum, it is not a box. It's a good kind of introduction to what these kind of disorders can be like, but also realize that Stephen is a fictitious character who has very exceptional abilities. But overall, I would love to know your thoughts in the comments. If you have a book that you highly recommend that deals with mental health in a positive, respectful way, I would love to hear about it, so go ahead and drop it in the comments below. Thank you so much for joining me for this. If you would like to see me do more videos like this, please go ahead and let me know. And if you want to subscribe, I'd love to have you here. I hope you have a fabulous night, and I will see you guys in the next video.